Rarely do we encounter an issue in medicine as divisive as contraception. Was it always this way? Welcome to the ReachMD Book Club. I'm Dr. Leslie Lundt, Director of Foothill Psychiatry in Boise, your host. And with me today is Dr. Aine Collier. Dr. Collier is an assistant professor of English at the University of Maryland. She holds degrees in European history, international business, and English education. Welcome to ReachMD, Dr. Collier.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Please tell us about the earliest forms of birth control.
Well, we know that Egyptian women were quite advanced, right down to having their ovaries removed to prevent pregnancy. On a day-to-day basis, though, a woman who didn't want to become pregnant in ancient Egypt might use what we would today call a tampon, which was a wad of papyrus or linen of some sort that was soaked in caustics that today we would think of as a spermicide. And then, of course, there were all kinds of herbal concoctions, some very useful, some completely useless. And also, some of the ancients used what are sometimes referred to as pessaries, or almost like a female condom. And those could be made out of hollowed-out gourds. The pomegranate was very popular at different times in early history. Tisanes were made often, in fact, in countryside in Germany. These were popular all the way to the 19th century, that has gone back for 1,000-plus years. Women often brewed tisanes out of the leaves of fruitless trees, thinking that if the tree was fruitless, then surely these things would, make them fruitless. Logic, I guess. And then there were some clergymen even who experimented with I think of them as dips, something kind of liquid that men would place on their members that supposedly sometimes worked. I don't know if it was accidental or if it was because, again, some of these dips were just sort of acidic and acted as a primitive spermicide. But these are the most commonly used things that mostly women, it usually fell to women to deal with not getting pregnant or dealing with unwanted pregnancies. But there were things that men did too.
So the pomegranate.
I know. Why the pomegranate?
Yeah, I'm having a hard time with that one.
Well, that one I think is probably on the books in a bigger way than other things that are just as odd, because of a woman who is often referred to as history's first gynecologist, Dame Tortula, I believe is the pronunciation of her name. She's an Italian woman, 13th century, practiced medicine, and she recommended the pomegranate as a sort of pessary, so hollowed out, placed upside down, if you will, and before sex, and in hopes that would actually catch the sperm and prevent pregnancy. So she's not the first to have suggested it, but she details it better than any other source.
Now, how did the church feel about birth control once you get into the Middle Ages?
Well, it's in the Middle Ages that the church really, of course, historically speaking, it really, finds its feet. Feudalism is starting to close out. The church has remained throughout the Middle Ages the sort of one source, if you will, not just of spirituality, but physically it was kind of, when towns and cities fizzled, churches were still around, as were churchmen. But this was a time when the church began to try to dictate to people individually and collectively about their own personal sexuality. Save marriages, sex is for the marriage bed and nothing else. It's only for procreation, not for pleasure. But so often, as in so many places and times and situations, what we preach is not necessarily what we practiced. And it's fascinating that many, many churchmen of the Middle Ages were actually the ones who document for us just what people were using or trying to use in regards to birth control. In fact, more than one pope had interesting wives tucked away and children and so forth, but also people like Pope Paul the 21st, who was a Spanish doctor as well as acting as pope in the 13th century, and he came up with what I call a liquid condom. It's made out of a lead-like substance and smeared on, but I don't think he had all his facts right because he had men smearing it on their testicles, not their penises. How well it worked, he didn't leave records of that. But it's amazing how many monks and people serving the church who were tucked away in the scriptoriums writing away about abortions and birth control devices. And there's a really rich resource there. But, of course, what they were doing individually is quite different than what the church was dictating at the time. But he felt it was a kind of condom that he hoped would prevent pregnancy. And he also told men to show some restraint. And He experimented with herbs as birth control for women, but he also promoted something on the order of a condom.
Now, how did you discover all this information?
Oh, years and years and years of digging through really ancient, dusty stuff, just because I like doing that. And I'd find one little bit, and then that would lead me to another little bit and another little bit, and it's just really needle in a haystack kind of research. And I've been so fortunate to be connected to 3 major research-oriented universities with these fantastic databases that, the average person just doesn't have the good fortune to be able to use. So I really exploited that in my research.
Now, when we move into the Renaissance, did they offer anything new to the world of contraception?
The Renaissance is such a funny time, isn't it? You think that it's going to offer so much advanced knowledge, but when it comes to birth control, not a lot. No, they actually seem to have gone backwards. There was a lot of use of charms and magic, and my favorite early Renaissance condom is one that was woven out of she-mule's hair that was supposed to be done in a sort of ritualistic manner with the man and woman doing it together, and then he placed it over his number, and this was supposed to be a condom, but it sounds just horrible. But supposedly this fur coming from a she-mule carried all kinds of magical properties that would prevent pregnancy. But in all, the Renaissance isn't really a rich time for advances in anything to do with birth control until the coming of the Indian measles, and that is when we see everything kick into place and sort of panic over STDs that had never been realized historically before.
If you've just tuned in, you're listening to ReachMD XM 157, the channel for medical professionals. I'm Dr. Leslie Lundt, your host, and with me today is Dr. Aine Collier. We are discussing the colorful history of contraceptives, as outlined in her book, The Humble Little Condom. Now, you mentioned the Indian measles. What is that?
Well, the Indian measles is what Columbus's sailors brought back with them. We today call it syphilis, but it had a lot of euphemisms before it actually was given the name syphilis, and Indian measles was probably the first one. The contagion was believed to have been brought with the sailors from, obviously, the islanders that they had contact with weren't Indians, but as we all know, Columbus incorrectly referred to them as Indians, so it kind of stuck.
So as we move into more modern times, tell us about Goodyear's role in contraception.
Oh, poor Goodyear. He had an absolute obsession with rubber, and he spent his fortune and his life trying to find a way to perfect it, because rubber is a marvelous, in its rawest form, it's really terrific stuff, but in extreme cold or extreme heat, it either melts or cracks and breaks. So many had come before him trying to make things like waterproof shoes and that sort of thing, but were unsuccessful. He was absolutely determined there had to be a way to make it a stable, usable item, and he accidentally discovered vulcanization. And with that, one of the first things he made or suggested be made out of them were condoms, because he felt that would really be a good use for his new invention. And he is the man who called the rubber, literally called condoms rubbers, and had a real fascination with their production.
So we can thank Mr. Goodyear for that.
Well, I don't know if we'd want to thank him, because quite frankly, well into the 20th century, a lot of rubber manufacturers bragged about the fact that one could last you a lifetime, if that would give you an idea of how thick and horrible these things must have been. The early ones didn't sell very well. The skin condoms remained. Linen kind of fell out of favor in the early 19th century because of for a variety of things, and the skin condom really remained. In fact, you can still buy them today, but they were cheap to make, and if they were made well, they were very effective and much finer and much more comfortable than the early rubber. It wasn't really until the late 19th century with the Germans who really perfected. They were the absolute artiers in condom manufacture until just before World War I, when the globe fell apart, if you will, and they kind of got cut off from the production. But they really made the first very fine quality rubbers. Prior to that, they could last a lifetime as long as you smeared them with lots of Vaseline when you put them away.
Well, speaking of Vaseline, now I understand from your book that Colgate advertised Vaseline as a contraceptive?
Yeah, Samuel Colgate's an interesting guy. He was one of the founders of the organization that helped Anthony Comstock bring about the Comstock Act, which really put the condom on the back shelf for an awfully long time in the United States. But yeah, he, in spite of the Comstock law, the Comstock Act, which absolutely said you must not advertise, talk about, educate about anything to do with birth control, sex, etc. When that was all happening, he happily had a huge advertising campaign that told women that if they were to mix the Vaseline with salicylic acid and use it as a sort of a crude pessary, that it was acted as a contraceptive, which we know, of course, today is absolute rubbish. But he was never persecuted for that. It was only the little guy during the long years of the Comstock Act who was persecuted for having anything to do with birth control or the education about it, to include very interesting and very colorful characters in the United States, especially, who manufacture condoms on their kitchen tables and make quite a lot of money from it.
Was there a medical loophole in the Comstock Act?
Comstock Act was supposed to have been just a postal act, but Anthony Comstock managed to extend it and use it for arresting all kinds of people under all kinds of interesting circumstances. But it did have a little catch in it that said that doctors could prescribe medical, if you will, medicinal condoms. And so Goodyear, Goodrich, Hancock rubber companies continued to produce rubbers legally. And then, of course, they always made too many, more than doctors were likely to prescribe, and they quietly sold those to chemists and druggist suppliers who quietly, again, had them under the counter. And if a man knew where to go to purchase them, he would just go in and get his little brown paper bag of illegal condoms. And Comstock caught some and didn't catch many others. So it was a thriving trade during the very conservative, in some ways, politically conservative, last quarter of the 19th century. But he also made life hell for a lot of the small condom manufacturers.
Well, thank you so much for being on our show today.
You're welcome.
We've been discussing the history of contraceptives with author Dr. Aine Collier. I'm Dr. Leslie Lundt. You've been listening to the ReachMD Book Club on ReachMD XM 157, the channel for medical professionals. We welcome your questions and comments. Please visit us at reachmd.com. Our new on-demand and podcast features will allow you to access our entire program library. Thank you for listening.
This ReachMD program is featured on Sermo, a free online community exclusively for physicians. To discuss this program with your colleagues, visit www.sermo.com. That's SERMO.com. When you join, enter ReachMD in the promotion box to receive a $15 Amazon gift card.